Hi, my name is Aishi, and today we'll be covering an overview of the cell cycle. So first off, what is the purpose of the cell cycle? Well, the purpose of the cell cycle is for a cell to divide and prepare for this division. It's to duplicate DNA as well as other components of the cell in order to make two genetically identical daughter cells. And the cell cycle includes the mitotic phase, which actually only makes up 10% of the time spent in the cell cycle. And the mitotic phase includes both mitosis and cytokinesis. Remember, mitosis is the division of the genetic material, it's the nucleus, and cytokinesis is the division of the cytoplasm and other components of the cell. Now, interphase makes up 90% of the time spent in the cell cycle, and interphase includes G1 or gap 1, the S phase or synthesis, and G2 or gap 2. Okay, so here we have the cell cycle, and it's drawn to give you a better understanding of how long each phase takes. So here we have interphase. And if you remember, interphase is made up of G1, gap 1, S, or synthesis, and G2, or gap 2. And interphase is by far the longest phase. It takes up around 90% of the time. Now, the mitotic phase includes mitosis and cytokinesis, and it takes up around 10% of the time. And usually in school, you spend a lot of time covering mitosis, and so you think that it's like it takes up the most time. But no, in reality, interphase is what takes up the most time. Remember that. Interphase is the longest. Now, one thing to notice is that synthesis, the S phase, lies between G1 and G2. So what happens during synthesis? In synthesis, you have the duplication of DNA. You're replicating the DNA. And so you end up with 2 times as much DNA as what you originally started with. And this makes sense because you're trying to, the purpose of the cell cycle is to end up with 2 identical daughter cells that are identical to the original parent. And so if you have 2 A cells, let's just call the cell A, then you want to end up with 2 A cells at the end of the cell cycle. So, why do you need the 2 gap phases? Well, the gap phases are essentially just to give your cells time to grow and acquire nutrients and resources and build up molecules so that it can undergo synthesis and mitosis and cytokinesis. Because you're doing a lot in the S phases and M phases, so you really need these resources. And the gap phases allow the cells to make sure that the internal and external environments are good enough in order to proceed into the synthesis and mitotic phases. Now in this diagram, I've drawn G1 to be the longest phase. However, in reality, the length of G1 will actually vary a lot from species to species and from cell type to cell type. So G1 doesn't have to be the longest phase. And now let's talk a bit about mitosis. Mitosis is made up of prophase, prometaphase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. And we will be covering mitosis in more detail in the next lecture.